The aroma of roasting turkey usually filled me with a sense of warmth and belonging, but this year, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as we pulled into my in-laws' driveway. The familiar sight of their sprawling, perfectly manicured lawn and the imposing two-story colonial home was a stark contrast to the rustic charm of our farmhouse, a visual representation of the chasm between our worlds. My wife, Sarah, squeezed my hand, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knew as well as I did that the annual Thanksgiving gathering was less a celebration and more a performance, with me cast as the supporting character who was just a little out of place. Last year had been awkward. My profession as a farmer, a heritage I was fiercely proud of, didn't quite meet my in-laws' expectations for their daughter's husband. They were people of spreadsheets and stock portfolios, their success measured in quarterly reports and luxury brand names. The conversations were always a minefield of thinly veiled condescension about the simplicity of my life, the unpredictability of my income, and the unfortunate mud I occasionally tracked into their immaculate foyer. It was a yearly endurance test of polite smiles and swallowed pride. As we entered the bustling house, the familiar faces greeted us with a mixture of forced cheer and genuine indifference. I tried to blend in, to make myself as small as possible, but the tension was a physical weight on my shoulders. Then Sarah's mother, Carol, a woman who weaponized passive aggression like a master craftswoman, approached us. With a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she gestured towards a small, flimsy folding table in the corner, barely big enough for the handful of young children who were already coloring in their Thanksgiving placemats. "We thought the kids would enjoy having you with them, Tom," she said, her tone saccharine sweet but with an underlying edge of malice that was impossible to ignore. Humiliation, hot and searing, washed over me. I forced a smile and nodded, mumbling something about how much I loved kids, but inside a quiet storm began to brew. This year would be different. This year they would see me. And while you're watching Tom's story unfold, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more incredible stories to life. Now back to the video. The drive home that evening was filled with a thick, suffocating silence. The vibrant autumn colors of the cornfields we passed were a cruel irony, a reminder of the life I loved and the people who so openly disdained it. The setting sun cast long, weary shadows across the landscape, mirroring the heavy feeling in my heart. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to bridge the gap. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I told Mum it was a terrible idea, but you know how she is once she gets something in her head." I just shook my head, unable to find the words. The sting wasn't just about the kids' table. It was the culmination of years of snide remarks, of being treated like a novelty, a pet project that didn't quite work out. It was the look in my father-in-law Robert's eyes, a look of pity mixed with disappointment. He saw a man who worked the land with his hands and saw a lack of ambition, not the fulfillment I found in nurturing the crops from seed to harvest. To them, my life was a quaint hobby, not a serious profession. Back at our modest farmhouse, the silence was still a presence, but it felt different here. It was the silence of a home, of a sanctuary, where the only judgment came from the changing seasons and the unforgiving soil. Sarah sat with me on the porch swing, our hands intertwined, and the crisp night air finally felt like a balm. "What are we going to do, Tom?" she asked, her voice small. "I can't keep doing this every holiday. It's tearing you apart." I looked out at the vast expanse of my fields, a dark canvas under the starlit sky. The humiliation of the day had hardened into a resolve, a cold, focused anger. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about respect. It was about showing them the value of what I do, the scale of my enterprise, and the sheer audacity of their judgment. A plan, ridiculous and brilliant, began to form in my mind, born from the very land they so easily dismissed. The next morning, the plan, which had been a wild whisper in the dark, solidified into a concrete, executable strategy. The idea was simple, audacious, and a little bit insane. It was about turning their condescension on its head, using the very thing they mocked to make a statement they couldn't possibly ignore. I spent the morning in my workshop, the smell of diesel and oil, a comforting presence, meticulously cleaning and preparing my prized possession, a brand-new state-of-the-art combine harvester. It was a beast of a machine, a marvel of modern agricultural technology, and it was worth more than their prized sedan. I had bought it with my own money, earned through years of hard work, smart investments in crop futures, and a bit of good luck with a bumper harvest. The harvester wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of my success, a testament to my dedication and the future I was building for my family. Sarah, watching me from the doorway, her arms crossed and a wry smile playing on her lips, finally broke the silence. "You're not actually going to—" she began, her voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. I looked at her, my eyes gleaming with a determined fire. "Oh, I am. I'm going to show them what a simple farmer is really capable of," I said, a rare hard edge to my voice. The plan was not just about the machine, it was about the logistics. I had to arrange for a flatbed truck to transport it, find a place to stage it near their neighborhood, and time the whole thing perfectly for their Christmas Eve dinner. Sarah, after a moment of quiet contemplation, nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her smile broadening. "I'm with you. But you're in charge of the post-harvester cleanup. No one gets to see the hay in the back of my car." Her support was the final piece I needed, the validation that this wasn't just an act of petty vengeance, but a shared stand against years of disrespect. We were in this together, ready to challenge the family dynamic that had made me feel so small. The day of the Christmas Eve dinner arrived, and with it a nervous energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The cold winter air bit at my cheeks as I watched the large flatbed truck, carrying my behemoth of a combine harvester, carefully navigate the quiet suburban streets of my in-laws' neighborhood. My heart pounded a rhythm against my ribs that matched the rumble of the truck's engine. Sarah was following in our car, a silent conspirator in this grand theatrical protest. She had insisted on taking a detour to ensure she wasn't seen arriving with the main event. The plan was for the truck to drop the harvester off on a nearby street corner, just out of sight, where I would then drive it the last 100 yards to their house. The logistics had been a nightmare, requiring permits and a careful study of local traffic laws, but I had made it happen. The sight of the monstrous machine, its yellow paint gleaming under the pale winter sun, felt both surreal and incredibly real. It was a statement, a testament, a symbol of everything I was and everything they had tried to diminish. As the truck's ramp lowered, a few neighbors peered out their windows, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. I climbed into the cab, the familiar feel of the controls a source of calm in the storm of my nerves. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the quiet suburban street. It was the sound of a purpose, a sound they couldn't ignore. This wasn't some rusty old tractor. It was a $1 million piece of equipment that screamed success and modernity. I began the slow, deliberate journey down their street. The houses, all uniform and perfectly manicured, seemed to shrink in comparison to the scale of my machine. The snow-covered lawns and festive lights felt like the backdrop to a play, and I was making my entrance, not as the forgotten son-in-law, but as the man who commanded a piece of machinery worth more than most of the homes on the block. The moment of truth was almost here. Hey everyone, Tom's story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you're enjoying this, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and join our community. It means the world to us. The journey from the street corner to the front of their house felt like an eternity. The combine harvester's immense tires flattened the freshly fallen snow, leaving a wide, purposeful path behind me. The noise was deafening, a symphony of powerful machinery that shattered the serene quiet of the suburban street. As I rounded the corner, I could see the guests gathering at the large bay window, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and shock. They were pointing, their hushed conversations turning into a frantic buzz. I could just make out my father-in-law, Robert, a look of pure, unadulterated astonishment frozen on his face. I pulled the colossal machine to a slow, deliberate stop directly in front of their front door, its immense height casting a shadow over their meticulously decorated Christmas porch. The engine idled, a low, menacing growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and then, with a final click of the controls, I shut the engine down. The sudden silence was more impactful than the noise, a void that was filled only by the shocked gasps of the onlookers. I climbed down from the cab, a small ladder helping me to the ground. The height difference was dramatic. I felt like I was descending from a throne. As my boots hit the pavement, I looked up at the house, at the many faces staring down at me, and felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't a petty act of revenge. It was an act of declaration. It was saying, "You see this? This is what I do. This is the scale of my life, the value of my work, and you will not diminish it." I walked towards the front door, my posture straighter than it had been in years, and I pressed the doorbell. When Robert opened the door, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger, disbelief, and a flicker of something that looked a lot like respect. I simply smiled. "I'm here for dinner," I said, my voice calm and steady. And I brought my own table. The atmosphere inside the house had changed completely. The joyful, boisterous chatter had been replaced by a tense, uneasy silence. The guests, no longer clustered in small groups, were all watching me as I walked into the room, a strange, new gravity surrounding my every step. The children, bless their innocent hearts, were the only ones who seemed genuinely excited. They pointed at the massive machine outside the window, their eyes wide with wonder, completely oblivious to the emotional warfare being waged around them. I saw Sarah standing by the fireplace, a subtle, proud smile on her face. Our eyes met, and in that brief moment I knew we had won. The battle wasn't about who was right or wrong, but about who was seen and heard. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming farmer. I was the man who had brought a $500,000 piece of machinery to Christmas dinner, and no one could ignore that. Robert, my father-in-law, cleared his throat, breaking the long silence. He gestured towards the main dining table, where there was an empty chair waiting for me. "Tom, why don't you sit down?" he said, his voice unusually soft, his usual bluster completely gone. I saw the empty kids' table in the corner, still standing, a silent, powerful monument to their past disrespect. The contrast was stark and deeply satisfying. I walked to the head of the table, not the kids' table, and sat down, the silence giving way to a low murmur of conversation as the other guests settled in. Carol, my mother-in-law, walked over to me, a flustered look on her face. "Tom, what in the world is that thing outside?" she asked, her voice a tight whisper. "The neighbors are calling." I looked her dead in the eye, my gaze steady. "It's my work, Carol," I said simply. "The same work you put at the kids' table." The truth, delivered without malice but with absolute conviction, hung in the air, a final, undeniable statement of my worth. The dinner that followed was unlike any other holiday meal I had ever shared with my in-laws. The usual conversations about stock prices and exotic vacations were replaced by a hesitant, and in some cases, genuinely curious discussion about farming. Robert, for the first time, asked about crop yields and the price of grain. The men who had once dismissed me as a simple country boy were now asking about the intricacies of my business, the technology behind the new harvester, and the challenges of modern agriculture. My mother-in-law, Carol, was a different story. She was visibly flustered and agitated, her polite mask beginning to crack. She kept glancing out the window at the colossal machine parked in her driveway, as if it might drive off and flatten the neighbors' prize-winning rose bushes. She eventually cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting a drink. "Tom, you've made a spectacle of us," she hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. "Our neighbors think we're hosting a circus. You've embarrassed us all." I took a sip of my water, my gaze unwavering. "Carol," I said, my voice calm, "I didn't make a spectacle of anyone. You did that when you told me to sit with the children. You made it clear that my profession, and by extension my worth, was a joke to you. Today, I simply showed you the value of that joke. That machine outside is not just a piece of equipment, it's the result of hard work and success that you have consistently chosen to ignore." She scoffed, her eyes darting away from mine. "It's a childish stunt." "Maybe," I conceded, "but it got me a seat at the adult table, didn't it? And it made you listen." The kitchen grew silent, save for the distant hum of conversation. For the first time, she had no retort, no passive-aggressive comeback. The truth of my words had stripped her of her verbal weapons. I had finally, after years of silent suffering, made her face the reality of her own prejudice. This is a big moment for Tom, and it's all leading up to an unforgettable finale. If you're on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the next 3 chapters. The tension began to slowly dissipate as the evening wore on. The conversation, once strained, began to flow more naturally, fueled by a genuine curiosity about my life. I found myself explaining the complexities of soil composition, the delicate dance of weather forecasting, and the thrill of a successful harvest. It was a world they had never considered, and they were, surprisingly, captivated. Even Robert, who had always been so dismissive, seemed to be genuinely listening. He eventually pulled me aside into his study, a room I had rarely been invited into before. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and fine cigars. He gestured for me to sit in one of the plush armchairs. "Tom," he began, his voice gravelly, "I have to admit I was completely out of line today, and last year, and probably a lot of times before that." The admission was shocking. This was a man who rarely, if ever, admitted to being wrong. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "I was proud of Sarah for becoming a successful lawyer, and I guess I always saw you as a step down. I saw a farmer, and I saw hard work, yes, but not the kind of success I understood. I saw my own father in you, the man who worked his hands to the bone and never got ahead. I was wrong to project that onto you. I'm sorry." The apology was raw, unexpected, and it hit me in a place I hadn't realized was so bruised. I simply nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I appreciate you saying that, Robert," I said, my voice a little unsteady. "It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the respect." He nodded back, a new understanding in his eyes. The combine harvester outside, a symbol of my protest, now felt less like a weapon and more like a bridge, a massive, noisy, and expensive bridge that had finally connected our 2 very different worlds. The Chapter 9, The Aftermath. As the last of the guests left, the house finally grew quiet, and the weight of the evening began to settle in. Sarah and I stayed behind, helping Carol and Robert clean up. The silence was no longer tense but comfortable, punctuated by the soft clinking of dishes and the quiet murmur of conversation. Carol, still visibly shaken by the events, approached me with a plate of leftover pie. "Tom," she said, her voice soft and hesitant, I'm sorry too, I shouldn't have done that. You're a good man, you're a good husband to Sarah." The words, though small, were monumental coming from her. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of my place in their family, a recognition of my value as a person, not just as a profession. I smiled warmly at her, taking the plate. "Thank you, Carol," I said, "and for what it's worth, I think your pie is amazing." It was a simple peace offering, a small gesture to bridge the gap and move forward. The next morning, as a light snow began to fall, Robert stood with me outside, staring at the combine harvester parked in his driveway. The machine, now covered in a thin dusting of snow, looked less like a mechanical monster and more like a strange, beautiful monument. "You know, Tom," he said, a small smile on his face, "my neighbor, Jerry, a retired banker, asked me how much that thing was worth. When I told him, he nearly fell off his porch. I've never seen him so impressed." I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that felt foreign and wonderful. "It's a great machine," I agreed, "and it's a part of my family's legacy. Just like this house is part of yours." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the harvester. The pride in my voice was not about the money, but about the hard-earned success it represented. It was a pride he finally, after all these years, understood. The following year's Thanksgiving was completely different. The drive to my in-laws' house, a journey that once filled me with a familiar, simmering dread, was now a peaceful cruise down familiar country roads, the crisp autumn air carrying a promise of warmth and good food. As we pulled into the driveway, the knot of anxiety that had once defined my holidays was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of calm and genuine belonging. The perfectly manicured lawn and the imposing house no longer felt like a barrier, but like a home I was a welcomed part of. We walked through the front door, and the greetings were different this time. They were genuine, warm, and filled with a new kind of respect that settled over me like a comforting blanket. Carol came over and hugged me, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "Tom, we're so glad you're here," she said, her voice sincere and her eyes, for the first time, held no judgment, only a deep sense of relief. "Dinner is ready. You're at the main table, of course." My father-in-law, Robert, clapped me on the back with a firm paternal gesture I had always longed for. "Tom," he said, a knowing twinkle in his eye and a genuine smile on his face, "I've been reading up on the market. Looks like the corn futures are looking good this year. What's your take on the latest USDA report?" It wasn't a throwaway question. It was a real request for my professional opinion, a conversation between equals. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The kids' table was still there, but it was occupied only by the children, who were happily coloring and laughing, completely oblivious to the silent drama that had unfolded a year prior. My place was at the head of the main table, a seat I had earned not with my wealth but with my dignity. The physical representation of my protest, the combine harvester, was back on my farm, but its message had been heard loud and clear. It was a statement that had reshaped a family, healed a rift that had been festering for years, and given me a sense of peace I hadn't known before. The dinner was filled with laughter, with honest conversation, and with a newfound understanding between two very different worlds. It wasn't about farming or finance anymore. It was about family. As I looked around the table at the faces of my in-laws, my wife, and my now accepted place among them, I knew that the real harvest was not in the fields, but right here, in the heart of this home. The seeds of respect, once planted in anger and defiance, had finally bloomed into a love that was strong and true. And that's the end of Tom's story. We hope you enjoyed this journey of self-worth and family reconciliation. If you loved it, please subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this one. Your support makes all of this possible. Thank you for watching.